The signal had been screaming for 9 days, and nothing in the void had answered it. You were the one who first heard it die down. Not stop, soften. The flotilla's distress call had run at full strength for 200 hours. A thin Sithari voice repeating the same 11 words across every band. And on the 9th day, the voice grew quiet, the way a thing grows quiet when it stops believing anyone is listening. You are first voice Velkar of the threaded unanimity, and you had been sent to end them. You should set down, at the start, what those 11 words were, because they are the whole of why any of this happened. The thread had translated them on the first day, and filed the translation, and never thought of it again. The words were a request. They were the oldest request there is, the one every living thing in the dark has sent at least once, and the Sithari had wrapped it in the simple shape a child gives things. We are still here. Please, someone come. The thread had read those words as a sound the prey makes, the way a held animal makes a sound, meaning nothing, requiring no answer. You will understand, before this is over, that somewhere in the unknown part of the dark, another mind had read the very same words, and decided that they required an answer above all other things, and that the whole difference between your people and that other people lived in those 2 readings of one small child's 11 words. Your hunting wedge held 41 ships, 41 minds threaded into one, sharing every reading, every angle, every cold decision, so that the wedge did not think like 41 captains arguing in a room. It thought like a single will, with 41 bodies. That was the gift of the unanimity. That was why your people had never lost a hunt in 600 turnings of your home star. You did not panic. You could not panic. Panic was a thing that happened to creatures who were alone inside their own skulls, and you had never once in your life been alone. The flotilla ahead of you was alone. 46 ships, and not one of them a warship. Seed barges and water haulers and 3 long generation arcs with their hulls patched in 17 colors. The Sithari had run from the unanimity for 3 years, system by system, losing a ship at every jump, and now they had run out of stars to run to. They sat in the deep dark between 2 arms of the galaxy, in a place with no name and no sun, and they waited for you because there was nothing left to do but wait. You knew the Sithari well, the way a hunter knows the thing it has hunted for years. You knew that they were a small, soft people, warm-blooded, 8-limbed, that they made music with the 4 of their limbs they did not walk on, that they raised their young in long communal nurseries aboard the generation arcs because they could not bear for a child to grow up alone. You knew that their distress call had been written by a child, because the 11 words had the simple shape of a child's words, and the thread had measured the broadcast, and found that the same voice sent it every day, all day, a young Sithari sitting at a transmitter aboard the largest arc, repeating 11 words into the dark for 200 hours, while the adults did the work of keeping the flotilla alive. The thread had found this and filed it. The thread did not care that a child was sending the call. The call was a sound the prey made. It would stop when the prey became an entry. That was all. You had hunted the Sithari for 3 years, and you had never once asked yourself what it was to be them. The thread did not ask such questions. To ask what it was to be the prey was to imagine yourself alone inside one skull, afraid, with no thread to share the fear, and the imagining was so foreign to a mind of the unanimity that it simply could not be done. So you did not do it. You came to end them, and you felt the smooth certainty of arithmetic, and you did not wonder about the child at the transmitter, because wondering was a private thing, and there were no private things in you. You felt no cruelty about it. The thread did not permit cruelty, because cruelty was a private feeling, and there were no private feelings in the unanimity. You felt only the smooth certainty of arithmetic. 46 unarmed hulls, 41 warships. The hunt would take less than an hour. The Sithari would be folded into silence, their worlds added to the catalog of the absorbed, and the wedge would turn for home before its crews needed to rest. You had hunted in this wedge for 40 turnings, and in all that time, it had ended 117 species, and not one of them had cost the wedge a single ship. That was the record you carried into the deep dark with no name. 117 kills, no losses, a perfect line in the catalog, the kind of line that made the homeworlds thread you to the front of the hunt whenever a new prey was found. You were proud of it, in the smooth shared way the thread permitted pride, which was not a private swelling of one mind, but a fact agreed upon by 41, a thing as solid and dull as a number. The wedge was the best the unanimity had. The wedge did not lose. The wedge had never lost. You spoke the order to begin the approach. You did not speak it aloud. You thought it, and 41 ships heard it as their own thought, and the wedge slid forward through the dark like a single blade. That was when the cold spot appeared on the deep scan. You almost missed it. It sat behind the flotilla, far behind, in the truly empty water, where there should have been nothing at all. A region of space that read colder than the void around it. Colder than the background of the universe itself, which should not have been possible, because nothing in the open dark is colder than the dark. The thread examined the reading. 41 minds turned to it at once, and 41 minds agreed it was an error. A ghost in the instruments. The kind of false return you get when a sensor stares too long into empty black. You marked it noise. You moved on. The cold spot grew larger. You looked again, and now the smooth arithmetic in your shared mind developed a small rough edge, the way a calm sea develops one wrong ripple. The cold region had a shape. It was not spreading like a sensor error spreads. It was holding an outline, a long, narrow outline, and the outline was getting bigger because it was getting closer, and the reason it read colder than the dark was that it was eating the heat of the dark around it as it came. Something was rising out of the void behind the dying flotilla, something that had been there the whole time, sitting still and cold and patient in the empty water, hidden not by any cloak your thread could name, but by the simple fact that it gave off nothing at all. No engine wash, no heat, no light, no signal. A hole in the dark, shaped like a ship, swimming toward the surface of your scan. The thread did a thing it almost never did. It hesitated. 41 minds, threaded into one will, paused in the middle of the approach, and the pause itself was strange, because the thread did not pause. The thread flowed, decision into decision, smooth as water finding its level. But the cold shape rising behind the flotilla did not fit any pattern in the catalog, and a mind built on the catalog does not know what to do with a thing the catalog does not hold, and so for the length of 3 of your slow heartbeats, the will of the wedge simply stopped, all 41 ships drifting on their old momentum, staring at the cold place in the dark. You will remember that pause for the rest of your life. It was the first time the thread had ever not known what to do, and you did not yet understand that it would not be the last, that in the next hour, the thread would forget how to do almost everything it had ever known, and that the forgetting had already begun. In that first small pause, the moment a cold shape your perfect memory could not name began to rise out of the empty water. The Sithari distress call, which had grown so soft, changed in that moment. It did not get louder. It changed words. For 3 years it had said the same 11 words. Now it said 3 new ones, repeated, slow and steady, and your translators caught them and laid the meaning bare across the shared mind of the wedge. They are here. You did not yet understand what that meant. The thread, which was never afraid, was not afraid now. But somewhere in the smooth pooled certainty of 41 minds, a single thought formed that none of them had placed there, and it sat in the middle of the shared water, like a stone dropped from above. Who is here? The cold thing crossed the last of the empty space behind the flotilla and stopped. It stopped between you and your prey, which no sane captain would do, because to stand between a hunting wedge and its target is to volunteer to die first. It hung there in the dark, longer than your largest warship, narrow and black, and giving off nothing, a shape that your scan could see only as an absence, a place where the universe had been switched off. And then it switched itself on. Every light along its hull came up at once, not weapon light, not the angry glare of a ship powering its guns, running lights, marker lights, the plain steady lamps a ship wears so that others can see it in the dark and know it is there. It lit itself up on purpose, in front of 41 warships that had come to kill, and the message of that was so strange that the thread went still trying to read it. It wanted to be seen. A signal came off it then, aimed not at you but at the flotilla, broadcast in the clear so that everyone in the deep dark would hear it, the Sithari and the unanimity alike. A single human voice, calm, unhurried, a woman's voice speaking in the trade tongue that drifted between the stars. This is the warship Iron Verdict, of Earth's Deep Watch. To the people of the Sci-Fi flotilla, you are no longer alone. To everyone else listening, stand off. We will say it once. The thread held all 41 minds perfectly still, reading those words, and for the first time in 600 turnings, your single shared will could not agree on what to do. You parsed the name the way the thread parsed everything, by spreading it across all 41 minds at once, and looking for the seam. Iron Verdict, Earth's Deep Watch. The catalog of the unanimity held 900,000 entries. Every species your people had met, or measured, or absorbed across 600 turnings, and the catalog had no entry for Earth. The thread checked it 3 times in the space of a breath. No Earth, no humans, no Deep Watch. A whole people had walked up to your hunting wedge, out of the empty dark, and your perfect shared memory did not know they existed. That should have been comforting. An unknown is a small thing. An unknown is one ship, alone, against 41. The arithmetic had not changed. One hull cannot stop a wedge. One hull had never stopped a wedge in all the turnings of your history. But the arithmetic of the thread is built on knowing things, and you did not know this thing, and the not knowing spread through the pooled water of your shared mind, like cold through metal. You aimed the wedge's deep scan at the black ship and let it look. 41 instruments, threaded into one eye, stared at the iron verdict and tried to take its measure. The eye came back with almost nothing. This was the part that broke the smoothness for good. When the thread scanned a ship, any ship, it read the heat of the reactors, and the shape of the hull, and the thickness of the armor, and the size of the crew by the warmth of their bodies. And from those numbers, it built a perfect knowledge of what the thing could do. The iron verdict gave the eye none of that. It read cold. It read dense. It read so dense that the numbers the scan returned could not be the numbers of a ship, because a ship that massive would have crushed itself the moment it was built. The hull did not glow with reactor heat. It drank heat. The void around it bent toward it, the way water bends down a drain. And the crew. The thread tried to count the warm bodies aboard, the way it always counted, and the count came back wrong. It came back small. A ship that long should have carried thousands. The eye found a handful, fewer than 100 warm shapes moving inside that black hull, and that should have meant the ship was a derelict run by ghosts, except the ship was not behaving like a derelict. It was behaving like a thing that did not need thousands, because the few it had were enough. A thought surfaced in the shared mind, placed there by one of the 41. You could not tell which, because in the thread, no thought has an owner. The thought was this: we are reading it wrong. It is hiding what it is. You took that thought and you tested it across the wedge, and the wedge agreed, and so it became true, the way all true things became true among your people, by everyone arriving at it together. The iron verdict was hiding. It was showing you a cold, dense, impossible nothing on purpose, the way a creature in tall grass shows you only the grass, which meant that under the nothing was a real ship, and the real ship was something the humans did not want you to measure. You should have turned the wedge then. The thread knew it. 600 turnings of never losing a hunt had taught your people one law above all the others, and the law was this: when you cannot measure a thing, you do not fight it, you wait, you watch, you measure, and only then do you strike. The unanimity had grown across half a galaxy by never once striking at a thing it could not first weigh. But the Sci-Fi were right there. 46 unarmed hulls, 3 years hunted, 9 days screaming, finally cornered. The catalog of the absorbed was so close to closing, and the black ship was only one. The thread looked at the certainty of 46 easy kills, and it looked at the unease of one unmeasured shadow, and the easy thing pulled harder than the wise thing, the way the easy thing always does, even in a mind that cannot lie to itself. You decided to test it. Not the whole wedge. A test. 3 ships of the 41 peeled off from the formation and went wide around the iron verdict, to slip past it and reach the flotilla, while the rest of the wedge held the black ship's attention. If the human warship was real, it would move to stop them. If it was a bluff, the 3 would reach the Sci-Fi, and the killing would begin, and the bluff would die with its makers. 3 minds detached from the thread, still connected, still sharing, and accelerated wide into the dark, on a long curve toward the helpless arcs. The iron verdict did not chase them. It did not even turn. It simply spoke again, the same calm woman's voice, in the clear, for everyone. We said stand off. You sent 3 to go around. We see them. Last warning was the last one. And then the black ship did a thing that the thread had no name for. It moved without moving. There was no flare of engines, no slow, heavy turn of a great hull coming about. One instant, the iron verdict hung between you and the flotilla, lit up and still. The next instant, a line of pale light reached out from its flank, crossed the dark, and touched the first of your 3 flanking ships, and the ship was simply not there anymore. No explosion the way your people made explosions. No spreading cloud of burning gas. The hull came apart into a fine, cold dust that drifted and went dark, as if the bonds that held it together had been quietly switched off, the way a fist unclenches. Through the thread you felt the mind of that ship's captain end, not die in pain, end. One moment, a voice in the shared water, calm, certain, threaded into the will of the wedge. The next moment, a gap, a cold place where a voice had been. The thread closed over the gap the way water closes over a sinking stone, smooth again in a heartbeat, but you all felt the cold of it pass through every one of you, and the cold was new. In 600 turnings, the thread had lost ships, but it had never lost one like that, between one thought and the next, with no time to even understand it was ending. The second flanking ship turned to run. The third tried to fire. It did not matter which. The pale light reached out twice more, unhurried, almost gentle, and both ships came apart into cold dust, and 2 more voices went out of the thread, and 2 more cold gaps opened in the shared water and closed. 3 ships, less time than it takes a Sathari heart to beat 4 times. And the iron verdict had not moved from where it stood. It had not turned. It had not chased. It had simply reached out across the dark and unmade what came at it, and then gone still again, lit up, patient, waiting to be obeyed. The thread, which could not panic, came as close to panic as the thread had ever come. You will not understand this unless you understand what the thread is. When one of you is afraid, all of you are afraid, because the fear pours into the shared water and spreads to every mind at once. A single frightened captain in a single skull can master his fear, breathe through it, set it aside. The thread cannot. Fear in the thread is fed by 41 sources at once and has nowhere to drain. It builds. It echoes. Each mind feels its own fear, and the fear of every other mind layered on top, and the layers stack, and what would have been a small fear in one body becomes a roaring thing in 40, now 38 bodies. The number itself was a wound that would not close, because the thread had never had to subtract from itself before. You fought it. As first voice, it was your work to fight it, to hold the shape of the shared will steady while the cold poured in. You pushed the arithmetic back to the front. 38 warships. 1 enemy hull. The iron verdict had spent 3 shots and killed 3 ships, yes, but it was still 1 ship, and 1 ship cannot stand against 38, and the law of mass and number had never once failed your people. The thread took the arithmetic and steadied on it. 38 is many. 1 is 1. The fear did not leave, but it stopped rising. The will of the wedge hardened around a decision. And the decision was the decision your people had always made, when the easy thing and the wise thing pulled apart, and the easy thing won. The decision was to commit. You ordered the wedge to close. All of it. 38 ships, threaded into one will, accelerated together at the black ship. Weapons live. The killing light of the unanimity building along every prow. Not 3 this time, not a test. The whole hunting wedge, the thing that had never lost, falling on a single shadow with everything it had. The iron verdict watched you come. It did not fire as you closed. That was the thing the thread could not file. A ship facing 38 oncoming hulls should fire while the range was long, should thin the wave before it broke, should spend every second buying distance. The black ship spent none of it. It let you come. It hung there, lit up, still, and the calm woman's voice came across the dark one more time, and this time it did not speak to the Sathari, and it did not warn the wedge. It spoke to its own people, and it left the channel open so that you heard it too, and the thread understood later that this was deliberate, that the humans wanted you to hear, because hearing it was part of the weapon. All hands, this is the captain. They committed. 38 inbound. Hold the line. Let them come to the wall. The wall. The thread did not know what the wall was, it found out. When the wedge crossed the last of the distance and came into the close dark around the iron verdict, the black ship finally moved, and the way it moved told you at last that the cold, dense, impossible reading had not been a bluff. It had been the truth, and the truth was worse than any bluff. The iron verdict did not dodge. It did not run. It turned its long flank to the whole oncoming wedge, exposing the most of itself it could, the way no ship trying to survive would ever do, and along that flank 100 ports opened at once, and out of them came not fire but a lattice, a wall of pale light, woven, holding a shape, thrown across the dark in front of the wedge faster than your ships could turn. The thread had 1 instant to read the wall before the first rank reached it, and what it read should have saved 11 ships, and could not, because the wedge could not turn in time. The wall was not armor, and not a shield. The thread had met armor and shields in 117 kills, and knew them the way it knew everything. This was neither. The pale lattice was made of the same thing the single shots were made of, the thing that touched a hull and switched off the bonds that held it together, but woven now into a sheet. A curtain hung across the dark, so that anything which crossed it crossed into the place where bonds did not hold. It was not a wall that stopped you. It was a wall that unmade you for crossing it, and it did not care how fast you came, or how heavy you were, or how many of you there were, because it did not push back. It simply ended what entered, the way the edge of a cliff does not push back against the sea, and yet the sea breaks on it all the same. The first rank of your warships flew into the wall at full speed. They did not break through it. They came apart on it, the way a wave comes apart on a cliff, into the same cold drifting dust as the 3 before them, and through the thread, you felt 11 voices end at once, 11 cold gaps tearing open in the shared water altogether, and this time the thread could not close over them fast enough, and the cold of 11 endings crashed through all 27 remaining minds at the same instant, and the wedge, the unbreakable wedge, the will that had never wavered in 600 turnings, recoiled. You felt it recoil. You were part of it recoiling. The shared will flinched back from the wall, the way a hand flinches back from a flame, an animal thing, older than thought, and for one terrible moment, the thread that bound 27 ships into one stuttered, and each of you felt for the first time in your whole life the thing the Sithari felt every day, and the humans aboard that black ship apparently felt and did not mind. Each of you felt, for one instant, alone. It was the worst thing you had ever felt. It was worse than the dust. It was worse than the gaps. The thread snapped back together in a heartbeat, 27 minds clutching at one another in the shared water, but the instant had happened, and it could not unhappen, and now every mind in the wedge carried the memory of being one, single, undefended thing in the dark. You did not know it, but that instant was the weapon. The humans had not built the wall to kill 11 ships. 11 ships was nothing, a number the unanimity could replace in a season. The humans had built the wall to do exactly the thing it had done, to make every mind in the wedge feel, for one instant, alone, because the humans had met your kind before in another part of the dark and had learned the one true fact about the thread, which the thread itself did not know. The thread did not bind you because it made you strong. It bound you because being alone, for a mind of the unanimity, was unbearable, and the thread was the thing that meant you never had to bear it. A people that cannot bear to be alone will pay any price to stay threaded, and the price the humans were about to ask was the only price the unanimity could not pay. They were going to make being threaded the thing that hurt. They were going to fill the shared water with so much ending, so much cold, so many gaps, that staying in the thread would become worse than being alone, and then the thread would do the one thing it had never done, the one thing it could not survive doing. It would choose to come apart. The humans knew that. You did not. You closed again. And across that dark, the iron verdict still had not been touched. The wall of light folded back into its hull. The ship turned its flank away again, slow, almost lazy, the running lights along its spine never once flickering. Through every band, in the clear, the calm woman's voice spoke, and it spoke now not to the Sithari, and not to its crew, but to you, to the thread, to the threaded unanimity itself, and the thread understood that it had been seen all along, that the humans had known exactly what they were facing, and exactly what it would do. Unanimity Wedge, we know what you are. We know you all feel that. We have met your kind before, in another part of the dark, a long way from here, and we learned how you break. You break from the inside. You are 41 minds pretending to be one, and the pretending only holds while you are winning. We are going to keep killing your ships until the pretending stops. The Sithari are leaving. You are not following them. Those are the only two facts left. Stand off, and what is left of you goes home. Close again, and none of you do. The thread held 27 minds in the cold water, and tried to decide, and could not, and the not deciding was itself a kind of breaking, because the thread had never in its history failed to decide. You were first voice. The deciding was yours to hold. And for the first time, you felt the weight of what that meant, because you could feel, leaking up through the shared water from 26 other minds, a thing that had no name in the language of the unanimity. It was the wish to run. 26 minds, each one wanting to break formation, peel away, flee into the dark and be alone, and alive, rather than threaded and dead. Each one ashamed of the wish, each one feeling the shame of every other. The shame stacked the way the fear had stacked, and the wanting stacked under it, and the whole structure of the thread groaned like a hull under a load it was never built to carry. You did the only thing a first voice could do. You spoke into the shared water, to all of them at once, the steadiest thought you had. We are the unanimity. We do not run. We have never run. One ship cannot be allowed to turn the thread. If we run from one, we are nothing, and everything we have absorbed in 600 turnings runs from us in turn. We close. We close together. The wall took 11. It cannot take 27. Close. And the thread, because it was the thread, because it was built to agree, and could do nothing else, agreed. 27 ships turned as one, and bored in toward the black ship a second time, and this time you went wide, and high and low all at once, not a single wave to be caught by a single wall, but a closing sphere. 27 prows from 27 angles, so that no flat sheet of light could face them all. The Iron Verdict watched the sphere form around it. The calm voice did not warn you again. It had warned you twice. It had said the second warning was the last one. It kept its word. What it did next, the thread would spend the rest of its short remaining time trying and failing to understand. The Iron Verdict did not throw the wall again, because you had built your sphere to beat the wall, and the humans seemed to know that you had. Instead, the black ship came apart. That is the only way the thread could record it. Along its long hull, seams that had never shown before, opened in the dark, and the ship separated into pieces, dozens of pieces, each one breaking away on its own light, each one cold and dense and silent like the whole had been, and the pieces scattered into the closing sphere of your warships and took up stations inside it, so that suddenly your sphere did not surround one ship. It surrounded 40, and the 40 were inside your formation, threaded through it, and every one of your ships had a black piece of the Iron Verdict beside it, matching its turn, holding its angle, sitting in the one place a warship cannot defend, the close blind water just off its own flank. The thread tried to understand it, and could only describe it. The humans had taken the one disadvantage of a single ship against a wedge, that it could be surrounded, and they had reversed it. You had not surrounded them. You had let them inside. And then a thing happened that the thread could not record at all, that it could only feel, and the feeling was the worst of the whole hour. The pieces of the Iron Verdict, scattered through your formation, began to talk to one another, not in the clear, not on any band your instruments could read. Quiet, tight, ship to ship, the way the humans talked, and your instruments caught the edges of it, faint, deliberate, and the thread tried to listen and found that it could not understand a word, and the not understanding was a horror your people had never known. The unanimity had spent 600 turnings being the thing that always knew. It read the heat and the shape and the warmth of bodies, and it knew, completely, what a thing was and what it would do. And here, woven through your own formation, 40 pieces of a single warship were speaking to each other in plain, quiet voices, planning your death together in the open, and you could not understand them, because understanding another mind was a thing the thread had never had to learn how to do. The thread shared. It did not listen. And now, for the first time, it needed to listen, and it had no idea how, and the pieces talked on, calm and quiet and unhurried, and killed you to the rhythm of a conversation you could not hear. The thread tried, in that moment, to do the thing it had always done best, which was to find the pattern and beat it. It spread the problem across 27 minds and looked for the rule. The pieces could not be everywhere. They had taken stations off your flanks, yes, but a piece that guards your flank cannot also guard your prow, and a piece that holds one angle has given up another. Somewhere in the cold geometry of 40 black hulls woven through 27, there had to be a seam, a place where two pieces overlapped, or a place where none did, and if the thread could find it, the wedge could pour its fire through the gap, and the gap would widen, and the woven thing would unravel. The thread looked for the seam with everything it had, 27 instruments, one eye, every angle at once, the kind of seeing no single captain in a single skull could match. And the thread found that there was no seam. The pieces of the iron verdict were not holding stations the way your ships held stations, each one minding its own angle. They were holding stations the way fingers on one hand hold a grip, each one moving for all the others, each one already sliding to cover the gap the next would leave, before the gap could open. The humans aboard those pieces, fewer than 100 of them spread across 40 hulls, were doing with their slow, clumsy, separate minds the thing the thread had always believed only a thread could do. They were acting as one, and they were doing it better than the thread, because the thread acted as one, by erasing the difference between its minds, and the humans acted as one, while keeping every difference, so that no two pieces ever made the same mistake at the same time, and the woven thing had no seam, because it was not pretending to be one mind. It simply was 40 minds that had decided, freely, separately, to move together, and could stop deciding it the instant the moving together stopped serving them, and never would, because they did not have to. You ordered the wedge to fire. 27 ships, killing light live, all of it, at once, into the pieces of the black ship that drifted among you. The killing light of the unanimity had ended 1,000 species. It crossed the close dark and struck the cold pieces, and did to them exactly nothing. The light that would unmake a planet's crust touched those dense black hulls and ran off them like water off stone, and the thread felt, for the first time, the full meaning of the cold, dense reading it had marked as noise. The iron verdict was not hiding a normal ship under the impossible numbers. The impossible numbers were the ship. It was as dense as the scan had claimed. It was as cold as the scan had claimed. The thread had refused to believe the truth, because the truth could not be a ship. And so the thread had spent the only minutes that mattered fighting a thing it had already measured correctly, and simply could not accept. The pieces of the iron verdict fired back. Not all at once, not a roar, a series of single quiet shots, paced, deliberate, each pale line crossing a short distance of close dark to touch a single one of your ships, and each ship it touched came apart into the cold drifting dust, and each one took a voice out of the thread. The humans did not waste a shot. They did not fire twice at one hull. They counted you down, the way a patient hand counts coins. One, and one, and one, and with every count, a mind went out of the shared water, and a cold gap opened, and the thread shuddered, trying to close it. 27 became 20. 20 became 14. And all the while the calm woman's voice spoke under the killing, low and steady, not gloating, not even raised, narrating the count to her own crew so that you heard it too. Down to 20. They are slowing. Hold your fire to the line, no waste. Down to 18. The thread is fraying, you can see it in the formation. Watch the edges. Down to 16. They will break soon. Do not chase the ones who run. It was the calm of it that finished you, more than the dust. You had come into the deep dark certain that you were the hunters, and the Sithari were the prey, and somewhere in the count, with the calm voice naming your dying ships like a tide going out, the certainty turned over, and you understood in the cold pooled water of your shrinking mind that you had never been the hunters at all. You had been the thing being counted down. The Sithari had screamed for 3 years, and the humans had answered. The unanimity had hunted for 600 turnings, and the humans had simply waited, in the cold dark, for the wedge to walk close enough to be taught. And now the teaching was a calm voice, counting your ships into dust, and you could not stop it, and you could not understand it, and you could not bear it. 27 became 20, 20 became 14, and at 14 the thing the humans had been building since the wall finally came due. And here is the thing that finished the wedge, and it was not the dust, and it was not the gaps. It was the silence of the pieces. Through all of it, the black hulls made no triumph, no challenge, no signal at all. They simply worked, calm and quiet and exact, the way a crew of fewer than 100 can work when each of them trusts the others, and none of them needs to be told. The Sithari distress call still drifted under everything. Soft, 3 words, "They are here," and the pieces of the iron verdict killed your ships to the rhythm of it, and made no sound of their own, and the thread broke. It did not break the way a hull breaks. It broke the way a held breath breaks. 14 minds in the shared water, each one carrying its own fear, and the fear of 13 others, and the cold of 27 endings, and the structure that bound them, the agreement that made 41 into one, simply could not hold the load, and it tore. You felt it tear. You were first voice. You were the seam they all held to, and you felt the threads pull out of your grip one by one. A mind here, breaking formation, fleeing into the dark, alone and screaming and alive. A mind there, going silent, not dead but withdrawn, curling away from the shared water into the dark of its own skull, because being alone was better than feeling 13 others die against it. The thread came apart in your hands, and there was nothing you could do, because the thread had never been a thing you commanded. It had been a thing you all were, and now you were not it anymore. And here is the cruelest part of it, the part the humans had built the whole hour to reach. The thread did not break because the wedge was beaten. By the old arithmetic, 14 warships against one hull was not a loss. 14 ships is a fleet in itself. Many peoples in the catalog had never owned 14 warships in their whole history. The wedge had the numbers, even broken, to fight on, and the old thread would have fought on, would have closed a 3rd time and a 4th and a 10th, spending ships without counting, because the thread did not fear death, only failure. But the humans had not aimed at the wedge's death. They had aimed at the one thing the wedge could not survive, the thing that held it together, and they had loaded the shared water with so much ending that staying threaded became worse than dying. The minds did not flee because they feared the iron verdict. They fled because they could no longer bear to be inside a thread that hurt this much, and the thread was the only thing that had ever made 14 warships into a force. Without it, they were 14 frightened captains in 14 separate skulls, and 14 frightened captains is not a wedge. It is a panic. The humans had not destroyed your strength. They had simply made you let go of it, and you had let go, all of you, because the alternative was to keep feeling, and there is a limit to what even a mind of the unanimity can feel before it lets go. The iron verdict stopped firing. That was the second thing the thread could not have predicted. It had the wedge broken, 14 ships scattering, the will that bound them gone. It could have ended every one. The pieces had the angles. The dust would have been easy. Instead, the pale shots stopped, and the black pieces simply held their stations, and the calm woman's voice came across the dark, and now it was quiet, almost kind, the way you would speak to a frightened animal you had decided not to kill. That is enough. You feel it now. You feel what it is to be one. That is the thing you have done to 900,000 others, and never once felt yourselves. We are not going to chase the ones who ran. We are not going to finish the ones who froze. We took 11 and 13 and 3, and that is what it cost to stop you, and we will not spend one shot more than the stopping needed. Gather your broken. Go home. Tell the unanimity what stood between you and the Sithari in the deep dark with no name. Tell them it let you leave. You hung in the dark, first voice of a thread that no longer existed, and you understood that you had lost. It was a thing your language had no word for, because your people did not lose. The catalog of the absorbed had 900,000 entries, and not one entry for a hunt that failed. You searched your perfect memory for any thread that had ever turned back, and there was none, and so there was no word, and so you sat in the cold water of a mind that was suddenly only your own, one mind, alone, the way you had been alone for one terrible instant against the wall, and now were alone for good, and you tried to find the shape of what had happened. You had brought 41 ships to kill 46 unarmed hulls. You were leaving with 14 scattered wrecks of crews, and the Sithari were alive, and the thing that had done it had not moved more than the width of its own hull in the entire engagement, and had not been scratched, and had told you to go home and live. You should have run. You knew it then with the part of you that had once been first voice, and was now only Velkar. The smart thing, the only thing, was to gather your 14 and flee, to take the gift the calm voice was holding out, the gift of being allowed to leave. But you could not move, and it was not fear that held you, or not only fear. It was the thing the humans had done to your mind, the thing you would carry home and never be free of. They had let you feel, for one whole hour, what the Sithari felt, and the Sithari were right there, alive, and the wedge that had hunted them for 3 years was scattered and broken in the dark, and your single mind could not stop comparing the two, the hunters wrecked and the hunted whole, and the comparison would not resolve into anything the old arithmetic could hold. The thread had taught you that the strong absorb the weak, that this was the shape of the universe, as fixed as the cold of the void. And in 1 hour, a single warship had stood the shape on its head, and held it there, and had done it not by being a stronger hunter, but by being something the thread had no category for, a thing that was stronger than any hunter, and chose to spend that strength sheltering the prey. And your single mind kept reaching for the file to put that in, and finding no file, because the catalog of 900,000 had never once recorded such a thing, because such a thing had never before crossed into the part of the dark your people called their own. The pieces of the iron verdict drew back together. You watched it happen across the close dark, the dozens of cold black hulls sliding back along their seams, fitting themselves into one long shape again, until the warship was whole, lit up, still, exactly as it had been when it first rose out of the void, as if nothing had occurred, as if it had not just unmade the unbreakable wedge of the unanimity, in the time it takes a frightened heart to slow back down. And then, with you and your 14 broken survivors hanging in the dark watching, the iron verdict turned its back on you. It turned its back, on a hunting wedge of the threaded unanimity. It showed you its long stern, and its drive, and the most vulnerable line a warship owns, and it did it on purpose, because it had decided you were no longer a threat, and it wanted you to know that it had decided that, and it wanted you to know that it was right. It moved away from you, toward the flotilla, and you did not fire, because firing was unthinkable now, because you had seen the wall and the pieces and the dust, and because some part of you that had been the first voice, and was now only Velkar, understood that the iron verdict had shown you a fraction of itself, and held the rest back, and that the held back part was the part that would have finished you, if you had been worth finishing. You followed it, not to attack, you followed it the way a thing follows the one creature in the dark that knows where it is going. You crept your wounded ship along behind the black warship, at a distance that you hoped said clearly we are done, and you watched what a human warship does when the killing is over. It went to the Sithari. The flotilla had drawn together in its fear, 46 ragged hulls clumped close, the 3 great generation arcs in the center, with the smaller ships around them like young around their elders. The distress call had gone silent at last, not because the Sithari had stopped sending it, but because they no longer needed to, and in its place, the flotilla had begun to broadcast something else, in the clear, on every band, the same way the humans broadcast, so that everyone in the deep dark would hear it. It was not a call for help. It was a name repeated, the way a people repeats a name when they have decided it will be remembered. Iron verdict. Iron verdict. Iron verdict. The black warship slowed as it reached them, and the running lights along its spine dimmed to something softer, and the calm woman's voice came across the dark again, and this time, it was not for the unanimity, and not a warning. It was for the Sithari, and you heard it, because the channel was open, and you began, slowly, in your single undefended skull, to understand the thing you had truly come up against, in the deep dark with no name. Sithari Flotilla. This is the iron verdict. The wedge is broken. It is not coming. You are not alone, and you are not going to be alone again. We have been looking for you for a long time. Stand down your distress call. Power your arcs for one long jump. We are taking you the rest of the way. The rest of the way. You watched the flotilla answer it. The 46 ragged hulls, which had drawn so tight in their fear, loosened, the smaller ships drifting back from the great arcs, the whole flotilla seeming to breathe out at once. And then, from the largest arc, the broadcast you had heard for 200 hours changed for the last time. The child's voice, the one that had sent 11 words into the dark for 9 days, and then 3 new ones. Sent a 4th thing now, and your translators caught it, and it was not a call, and not a name. It was a question, simple, small, the kind of question only a child asks aloud. The voice asked whether it was really true, whether the dark thing was really a friend, whether they were really going to be all right. And the calm woman's voice on the iron verdict answered the child directly, by name, because the humans had been listening to that voice for 200 hours too, had crossed 3 years of void with that voice in their ears, and knew exactly whose it was. The captain of the warship that had just broken the unbreakable wedge of the threaded unanimity spoke to one frightened Sithari child, soft, certain, and told the child yes, it was true. The dark thing was a friend. They were going to be all right. The child should power down the transmitter now and go find the others, because no one needed to send the call into the dark anymore, because the dark had answered, and the answer was staying. Your single mind, alone, listening, felt something it had no word for, and the something was very close to the not-word sound the Sithari were beginning to make, and you let it happen, because there was no thread left to feel it spread. The thread was gone, but the habit of the thread remained, and your single mind reached for the meaning of those words the way the wedge would have reached, spreading them out, looking for the seam, the rest of the way to where. The Sithari had run for 3 years from system to system, and had run out of stars. There was nowhere left for them to go, there was no rescue. There had never been any rescue. That was the arithmetic you had counted on. No one was coming for the Sithari, because no one in the catalog of 900,000 was strong enough to come, and so they were yours. And one ship had risen out of the empty void behind them, cold and dense and impossible. A ship from a people your perfect memory had never heard of. And it had broken your wedge, and turned its back on you, and gone to the helpless flotilla, and told them, in a calm woman's voice, that the rest of the way was somewhere, and that the iron verdict knew where, and that no one would ever corner them in the dark again. You crept your wounded ship a little closer, against all sense, because you needed to see where the rest of the way led, and the iron verdict let you. It knew you were there. It had always known where everything was. It let you follow, and you understood that this too was deliberate, that the humans wanted at least one mind of the unanimity to see what came next and carry it home, and you understood that you were that mind, the one chosen to witness, the way Velkar had once chosen which ships would witness a kill. The 3 great generation arcs of the Sithari began to power their drives for a long jump, and in the deep dark behind the iron verdict, in the same empty cold water from which the black warship had risen, the scan of your single wounded ship picked up something new, and your single mind went very still, the way the whole thread had gone still at the first cold spot, because now you saw that the iron verdict had never been alone either. The cold water behind the iron verdict was not empty. It had never been empty, it had only been patient. Your single scan, freed now from the thread, slower and weaker than the great pooled eye of the wedge but yours alone, looked into the deep dark from which the black warship had risen, and it found, holding station far back in the truly empty water, a long quiet line of cold spots. 11 of them. 11 more places where the universe read colder than the void. 11 more long, narrow outlines drinking the heat of the dark. 11 more ships of Earth's deep watch hanging silent and unlit in the deep, watching, exactly as the iron verdict had watched, for as long as it took. The thread would have panicked at the sight. Your single mind only grew quiet, because you had passed beyond the place where more numbers could frighten you. One ship had broken the wedge. The 11 behind it had not fired a single shot, had not even lit a single lamp, had simply sat in the dark and let the iron verdict do the work alone. And the meaning of that was the largest thing you had learned in the deep dark with no name. The humans had sent 12 ships and used 1. They had held 11 in reserve against a hunting wedge of the threaded unanimity, and they had not needed them, and they had let you see that they had not needed them. That was the message under all the other messages. Not we are strong, worse. We did not have to try. The 11 cold ships did not move toward you. They moved toward the flotilla, slow and silent, and they took up stations around the ragged Sithari hulls, 1 to each cluster, the way the pieces of the iron verdict had taken stations off your flanks. Except now they did it to shelter and not to kill. 12 black warships, cold and dense and impossible, folded themselves around 46 broken civilian ships, like a hand closing gently around something small, and the running lights of all 12 came up at once, soft, so that the Sithari, who had hidden in the dark for 3 years, found themselves for the first time standing in the open with light all around them and nothing in the dark that could reach them. Your single eye, weak now, alone now, picked over the 11 cold ships as they moved, and tried to learn from them the way the thread had tried to learn from the iron verdict, and learned the same lesson 12 times over. Every one of them read cold and dense and impossible. Every one of them carried fewer than 100 warm bodies. Every one of them had crossed 3 years of empty void to reach this nameless patch of dark, and had sat unlit and silent the whole time, and had been willing to wait there forever, if that was what the answering required. The Deep Watch did not measure its strength in numbers. It measured it in patience, and patience is the one thing a hunting wedge cannot outweight, because a wedge is built to strike, and a thing built to strike cannot bear to wait, and the humans had known that too. They had let your impatience herd the Sithari toward them. They had used the very thing that made the unanimity strong, its hunger to close and finish, to walk the prey into the one place the answer was waiting. You thought of the catalog, 900,000 entries, every species your people had met, weighed, hunted, absorbed. You had believed the catalog was the shape of the whole galaxy, that to be outside it was to not exist. And here, around a flotilla your people had been about to erase, were 12 warships of a people the catalog had never heard of, and the catalog had not been wrong by a small amount. It had been wrong by the largest amount it was possible to be wrong, because the thing it had left out was the thing that could break the wedge without moving, and a catalog that leaves out the one thing that can end you is not a catalog. It is a comfort, a story your people told themselves in the shared water so that the dark would feel known. The humans had walked out of the unknown part of the dark and shown the unanimity that the unknown part was where the real strength had been hiding all along. The flotilla's broadcast changed again. The name stopped. In its place, the Sethari began, all 46 ships together, to send a sound that your translators could not turn into words, because it was not words. It was the sound a people makes when it has been afraid for 3 years, and is suddenly, completely, not afraid. Your single mind, which had never been afraid until an hour ago, and would be afraid for the rest of its life, listened to that sound, and something in it ached in a way the thread had never permitted, and you let it ache, because you were alone now, and there was no one to feel it spread. The calm woman's voice came across the open dark, and this time it told a story, and it told it in the clear, and you understood that it told it for you, the watching mind of the unanimity, as much as for anyone, because the humans wanted the story carried home. She said the Deep Watch had heard the Sithari distress call not 9 days ago but 3 years ago, at the very beginning of the running, a thin signal at the edge of the dark, 11 words repeated, and the Deep Watch had answered it the way the Deep Watch answered such things. Not with a fast, loud rescue that would have been seen and stopped, but with patience. 12 ships had folded into the deep, cold water of the galaxy's between-arm dark, and gone silent, and begun to move toward the signal, slow, unlit, drinking the heat of the void, so that nothing could see them coming, and they had crossed the empty places for 3 years, while the Sithari ran and lost a ship at every jump, and they had timed their arrival not for the easy moment, but for the last one, because the humans had wanted the unanimity to commit, to bring its whole wedge, to put all of itself in one place, where one warship could break it, where everyone could see. The Sithari had not known. They had run and screamed and lost ships, and believed, on the 9th day, that no rescue was coming, because no rescue had ever come for anyone the unanimity hunted, and they had let the distress call soften, because they had stopped believing, and the humans had let them stop believing, had let the call soften and the hope die, because the humans had been waiting in the cold dark behind them the whole time, and had needed the wedge to come close enough that the breaking would teach a lesson, not just win a fight. Your single mind turned that over, and found, under the patience and the timing, a thing that frightened it more than the wall and the pieces and the dust. The humans had used the Sithari's hopelessness as part of the trap. They had let a frightened people believe they were going to die, for 9 extra days, because it brought the wedge in tighter. And the Sithari now, hearing it, did not turn against them. The flotilla heard the calm woman explain that their despair had been allowed to deepen on purpose, and the not-word sound they were making did not change, did not sour, because the Sithari understood the thing your single mind was only beginning to understand. The humans had not gambled with lives they did not value. They had simply known, with a certainty as deep as the thread's old certainty, but built on something the thread never had, that the iron verdict would not fail, and so the only question had ever been how complete the lesson would be, and they had chosen to make it complete. The arrogance of it should have comforted you. Arrogance breaks. The thread had broken from the inside, and you had spent your whole life learning that confidence is a thing that can be turned against the one who holds it. But you had watched the iron verdict stand still and break the wedge without moving, and you had seen the 11 cold ships behind it that were never even needed, and you understood that what the humans had was not arrogance. Arrogance is confidence that exceeds the truth. This was confidence that matched it exactly. The humans were sure they could not fail, because they could not fail, and they had built the whole long, patient 3-year trap on that one stone, and the stone had held. You watched, through your single eye, the small things the humans did then, and the small things taught you more than the wall had. The black warships did not simply herd the flotilla and wait. They worked. Lines reached out from the cold hulls to the broken Sithari ships, gentle, careful, and your instruments read the meaning of the work. The humans were giving. They were passing across power to the water haulers whose cells had run low in 3 years of running. They were sending repair crews, in small craft, hand to hand, to the seed barge whose drive had cracked at the last jump and would never have made another. They were taking the worst of the wounded ships under tow so that the flotilla could jump as one and leave none behind. The thread, if it had still been a thread, would not have understood any of it, because the thread had no concept of giving. The unanimity took, it absorbed, it added entries to a catalog. The idea of crossing 3 years of void and breaking an unbreakable wedge, and then spending your own power and your own crews and your own hours mending the broken ships of strangers who could give you nothing in return. The idea was so foreign that your single mind had to build a new place to hold it, and the building hurt, the way it hurts to grow a thing you were never shaped to grow. That was the deepest cut of the witness, not that the humans had beaten you, that having beaten you, they did not think of you at all. The wedge that had hunted for 600 turnings and ended 117 species was, to the people of the Deep Watch, a small chore finished early, and now there was the real work to do, the work that had brought them across 3 years of void, the mending of a frightened people, and the wedge could watch or leave. It did not matter. It had stopped being part of the story the moment it stopped being a threat. The Sithari arcs finished powering their drives. The long jump was nearly ready. You crept your wounded ship closer still, and now you did a thing that the first voice of a hunting wedge would never have done, that no mind of the unanimity had done in 600 turnings, because it had never been possible to do alone. You opened a channel. One ship, one voice. You spoke into the open dark, in the trade tongue, to the iron verdict, and you did not know what you were going to say until you said it, because the thread had always said things for you, and the thread was gone. You asked why. You asked why a people your perfect memory had never heard of had crossed 3 years of empty dark for 46 ships of a species that was not theirs, that could give them nothing, that the whole galaxy had abandoned. You asked why they had spent 11 and 13, and 3 of their own kind, real kind, ships with fewer than 100 warm bodies each, to save strangers who would have died and been forgotten and cost the humans nothing. You asked it not as a trick and not as a threat. You asked it because your single mind, alone for the first time, needed an answer the way a thing that is cold needs warmth, and the only voice in the dark that might have one was hers. You expected no answer. A broken enemy has no right to one. The thread, when it had absorbed a people, had never explained itself to the last voice of the absorbed, because there was nothing to explain, because the strong absorb the weak, and the explanation is the absorbing. You had asked your question into the open dark the way the Sithari had screamed their call into it. 11 words, 200 hours, expecting nothing, because nothing was what the dark had always given. There was a silence, long enough that you thought she would not answer the broken enemy, and then the calm woman's voice came back, and it was not calm now, not exactly. It had something under it. and your translators caught the something and could not name it, and your single mind decided it was the human version of the not-word sound the Sithari were making. She said that a long way from here, in another part of the dark, humanity had once been the flotilla. She said there had been a thread of their own to run from, a thing that hunted them system to system and counted them like coins, and that no rescue had come, because no one had been strong enough to come, and that humanity had run out of stars and sat in the dark with no name and let its distress call soften because it had stopped believing anyone was listening. She did not say how it had ended. She said only that humanity had decided, after, that it would build a thing that listened to the dark and answered, and that the answering would not be a kindness it spent when it was convenient. It would be a law it could not break. The Deep Watch did not choose which calls to answer. It answered. That was the whole of it. That was the thing under all the other things. She said the Deep Watch had been built out of one promise, and the promise was the hardest kind, because it was a promise with no exceptions. Humanity had argued about it for a long time, she said, the way humanity argued about everything. Because a promise with no exceptions is expensive and dangerous, and asks you to spend your own people on strangers who can give you nothing back. There had been humans who said the answering should be chosen. The strong ones saved and the doomed ones left. The calls weighed before they were answered. And humanity had decided, in the end, against them. Because humanity remembered, in its bones, in the deepest shared water it had, what it had been to send a call into the dark and have it weighed and found not worth answering. So the Deep Watch did not weigh, it answered. Every call, even the ones that softened on the 9th day because the sender had stopped believing, especially those. She said that the hardest part of the work was not the breaking of wedges. The breaking was easy. The hardest part was the patience. The 3 years in the cold dark, unlit and silent, drinking the heat of the void, moving slow toward a scream that grew fainter every day, knowing that the people you were coming for had stopped believing you existed, and coming anyway, because the believing was not the point. The point was the answering. The Sithari had stopped believing rescue was coming. The Deep Watch had not stopped coming. Belief had nothing to do with it. That, she said, was the whole of what the Deep Watch was. Not a fleet, a promise that the dark could not talk you out of. She said one more sentence, and your single mind carried it home and never let it go. We were left alone in the dark once, she said, and we decided that no one we could reach would ever be left alone in it again. And the wedge that came for the Sithari is the same shape as the thing that came for us. And we know exactly what it feels like to be inside it. And we will break it every time, in every part of the dark, for as long as there is a Deep Watch to do the breaking. The flotilla jumped. It was a strange and beautiful thing to watch through a single eye. The 3 great generation arcs opened their drives, and the 46 ragged hulls folded together into one long fast jump, and around them the 12 black warships of the Deep Watch folded with them, cold and dense and silent, escorting them out of the deep dark with no name toward the rest of the way, wherever it was, somewhere your perfect memory had no entry for, somewhere the unanimity could not reach. The light of all of it touched your wounded hull for one moment, the soft running lights and the bright drives and the not-word sound of a people that was no longer alone, and then the dark folded over them and they were gone, and the deep cold water between the 2 arms of the galaxy was empty again, and you sat in it alone, with your 14 scattered survivors and the cold gaps where 27 minds had been. You sat in the empty water where the flotilla had been and tried to hold the size of what you had seen. 46 ships saved. A people lifted out of 3 years of dying and carried toward light, and it had cost the Deep Watch 11 and 13, and 3 of its own, 27 endings, real crews, fewer than 100 warm bodies to each ship, gone into the breaking of your wedge. The thread had never once in 600 turnings spent its own to save a stranger, because the arithmetic of the thread had no column for such a spending. A life was a thing you took or a thing you kept. It was never a thing you gave to someone who could not pay it back, and the humans had a column for it. The humans had built their whole Deep Watch around that column, had crossed 3 years of void to fill it, had spent 27 of their own into it without a moment's argument, because the column was the point, the saving was the point. The Sithari could give the Deep Watch nothing, and that was exactly why the Deep Watch had come, because a people that only saves the ones who can pay is not the deep watch. It is only another kind of hunter, weighing the prey before it strikes, and the humans had decided, in another part of the dark, that they would never again be that. You thought of the 11 words, "We are still here. Please, someone come." You had read them as a sound. The humans had read them as a debt they owed to no one, and chose to pay anyway, and they had paid it in their own dead, gladly, completely, and they did not think the price too high, and that was the thing your single mind could not get to the bottom of, no matter how long it looked, because there was no bottom to it, that the thread had ever taught you to find. The iron verdict was the last to go. It held station for a moment after the rest, lit up, still, exactly as it had been when it rose from the void, and it turned, slowly, deliberately, so that its long flank faced your wounded ship one final time, the same flank that had thrown the wall, and your single mind braced, because a warship that turns its flank to you has decided something, but it did not throw the wall. It dimmed its running lights, once, slow, the way a thing dips its head, and the calm woman's voice came across the dark one last time, for you, for the broken first voice of a broken wedge, and it said only this: "Go home, Velkar. Tell them what listens in the dark now. Tell them to stop hunting the ones who scream, because we hear it too, and we are always closer than you think." And then the iron verdict folded into the void and was gone, and you were alone, truly alone, in the empty cold water, and for the first time in your life there was no thread to tell you what to feel, and so you sat in the dark and felt all of it at once, by yourself, the way the Sithari had felt it, the way the humans had felt it long ago in another part of the dark, and you began, slowly, to understand what they had been trying to teach the whole time. You gathered your broken survivors slowly, because there was no thread to gather them with, and a thing that has never had to ask, cannot ask quickly. 14 ships had survived the deep dark with no name. 3 had fled at the moment the wedge tore, scattering into the void alone, and your single weak scan found 2 of them, and lost the 3rd for good. 11 had frozen, withdrawn into the dark of their own skulls, curled away from the shared water, because feeling 13 others die against them had been more than the thread could bear. You went to each of them, one at a time, across the cold, empty water, and you found that you did not know how to speak to a mind that was not threaded to yours, because you had never once in 600 turnings of your people's history had to. You learned. You learned it the slow, clumsy, lonely way, the way the Sithari spoke and the humans spoke, voice to voice across a gap, never sure the other had truly understood, never able to simply pour your meaning into them and know. It was exhausting. It was small and weak and slow. And as you did it, ship to ship, mind to lonely mind, gathering your broken people for the long limp home, you understood the first piece of the thing the humans had been teaching. The thread had never made you strong. It had only made you sure. And sureness, it turned out, was a thing that could be broken from the outside in less time than a frightened heart takes to slow, while the slow, clumsy, lonely speaking of separate minds, the thing your people had always pitied in the Sithari and the humans, could not be broken at all, because there was nothing in it to break. You could not tear a thread out of a mind that had never been threaded. You could only kill the body, and the humans had shown you that even that, they would do only as much of as the stopping needed, and not one shot more. You began the long jump home with 13 ships, having come with 41, and on the way, you did the thing the calm woman had told you to do. You composed the report you would carry to the threaded unanimity, and you found that you could not compose it the way reports had always been composed, because reports had always been the thread agreeing on what had happened, and there was no thread, and there would never be a thread again, because you had felt it break, and you knew now that it could break, and a thing you know can break is never whole again. You found a second thing on the long jump home, and it frightened you more than the first, because the first was about your enemy, and the second was about your own people. You went back, in the alone, over 600 turnings of the catalog. You had time. There was nothing else to do, and no thread to fill the dark with the work of agreeing. You went entry by entry, species by species, the 900,000 the unanimity had hunted and weighed and absorbed, and you looked at them now with a single mind, from the outside of the thread, and you saw the thing the thread had never let you see. Every one of them had screamed. Every single entry in the catalog of 900,000 had, at the end, sent its thin signal out into the dark, and repeated it until it stopped believing anyone was listening, exactly as the Sithari had, exactly as the humans once had in another part of the dark. And the unanimity had heard every one of those screams, because the unanimity heard everything, and had counted them, and had filed the screaming as a stage of the hunt, a sound the prey made before it became an entry, nothing more. 900,000 screams, heard and filed and forgotten. The humans had heard one and crossed 3 years of void to answer it. That was the whole difference between your people and theirs, and your single mind sat with it in the cold dark on the long jump home, and it was the heaviest thing you had ever held, because you could not put it down, and you could not file it, and you could not make it untrue. You had heard the screaming all your life, and called it the sound of winning. The humans had heard it once, and called it a thing that must never be allowed to go unanswered. And one of those two peoples had built a thread that broke from the inside the first time it lost, and the other had built a thing that rose from the void, and could not be broken at all. And you understood, finally, which was the strong one, and it was not the one you had spent your whole life being. You wrote it alone. You wrote the truth. You wrote that a hunting wedge of 41 ships had cornered 46 unarmed Sithari hulls in the deep dark with no name, and that one warship of a people called the Deep Watch, from a world called Earth, a world the catalogue of 900,000 had no entry for, had risen out of the void behind the flotilla and broken the wedge without moving from where it stood. You wrote that it had killed 27 ships and spared 14, and that it had told the 14 to go home and live, and that it had meant it. You wrote that the warship had read cold and dense and impossible, and that the reading had been true, and that the thread had refused the true reading because the truth could not be a ship, and that this refusal had cost everything. You wrote that the warship had carried fewer than 100 warm bodies, and had needed no more, and that 11 more warships had waited unlit in the deep dark, and had never been needed at all. And you wrote the sentence the humans had wanted carried home, and you wrote it exactly, because it was the only part of the report that mattered. We were left alone in the dark once, and we decided that no one we could reach would ever be left alone in it again. You sent the report ahead, on the long bands, to the worlds of the threaded unanimity, and you did not soften it, because you had watched what softening did. The Sithari had softened their distress call on the 9th day, because they had stopped believing, and the humans had let them, and the despair had been part of the trap. You would not let your own people soften the truth into something they could survive believing. You sent it whole. The unanimity received it, and for the first time in 600 turnings, the thread of a whole people had to decide what to do with a thing it could not absorb. You were there when the answer came back, threaded once more, briefly, into the great shared water of your homeworlds, and you felt the thread try to do to your report what it did to everything, to spread it across 1,000,000 minds, and find the seam and file it into the catalog and move on. And you felt the thread fail. There was no seam. The report was true at every angle, and the truth had no place to be filed, because the catalog had no entry for a hunt that failed, and the thread could not make one without admitting that hunts could fail, and admitting that hunts could fail was the same thing that had broken your wedge in the deep dark, the moment the sureness cracked. The unanimity, you understood then, was facing the wall, not the wall of pale light, the other wall, the one the humans had shown your wedge first, and the whole of your people now, the wall that stands at the edge of a sureness that has never been wrong, and that no number of minds threaded together can climb, because the thing on the other side of it is the simple fact that you can lose, and a people that has never lost cannot hold that fact without breaking the thing that made it never lose. You arrived home with 13 ships, and the homeworlds met you the way the homeworlds met everything, by threading you back into the great shared water and reaching for what you knew, and the great shared water recoiled from you. You had not understood that you would frighten them, but you came home carrying the break, the felt memory of the thread tearing, and a mind that has felt the thread tear is a mind the thread cannot fully trust again, because it knows the unthinkable thing, that the thread can come apart, and 1,000,000 minds that have never known that suddenly had to share water with 13 minds that did. The break was in you the way the cold gaps were in you, a thing that would not close. And when the homeworlds threaded you in, the break leaked into the great shared water, the smallest amount, a single cold ripple in a vast calm sea, and the sea felt it, and for the first time in 600 turnings, the great thread of the whole unanimity flinched. You felt it flinch. You were the thing it flinched from. And in that moment, you understood that the humans had not needed to send the report at all. They had sent it, yes. The sentence, the why, and the sentence would do its slow work. But the truest weapon they had loosed into the unanimity was not the report. It was you. 13 ships of minds that had felt the thread break, sent home on purpose, allowed to live on purpose, so that they would carry the break itself into the great shared water, and let the whole of your people feel, at last, the one thing the thread had spent 600 turnings making sure no one ever felt. The humans had infected the unanimity with the knowledge of its own breaking, and they had used you to do it, and they had let you understand that they had used you, because understanding was part of the wound. The great thread had felt, for one instant, that staying threaded to you might cost it more than it could bear, and it had chosen, for one instant, to be apart from you, rather than share what you carried. Then it closed back over the gap, smooth again, a million minds clutching at one another, the way the wedge had clutched at itself. But the instant had happened, and it could not unhappen, and now the whole unanimity carried, in the deepest shared water it had, the memory of recoiling from a part of itself. The humans had not needed to bring their fleet to the homeworlds. They had sent 13 ships of broken minds, and the broken minds had done what no fleet could do. They had taught the great thread, in one instant, that it could flinch. And a thing that has learned it can flinch is never again the thing that could not. You waited to see whether the unanimity would break the way the wedge had broken. It did not all at once. The thread is older and deeper than any wedge, and it did not tear in a heartbeat. But you felt it change. You felt, across the great shared water, a million minds receive the sentence the humans had sent, "We were left alone in the dark once." And you felt the sentence do to the thread what the wall had done to the wedge, slowly, from the inside. Because the unanimity had hunted the screaming for 600 turnings, had found the species that ran and lost ships at every jump, and cornered them in the dark, and added them to the catalog, and had never once asked what it was to be the thing that screamed. The humans had asked. The humans had been the thing that screamed, in another part of the dark, and they had built a warship out of the asking, and they had sent it across 3 years of empty void to stand between a wedge and a flotilla, and break the wedge and let it live, and tell it why. The thread could not unhear the why. You had carried it home, whole, and now it sat in the shared water of a million minds, and it would not file, and it would not soften, and it would not go away, and you understood that this too was the weapon. The humans had not come only to save the Sithari. They had come to put a sentence inside the threaded unanimity that the unanimity could not remove, and they had used 1 warship and 11 witnesses and a flotilla's despair to plant it, and it was planted now, and it would grow. You do not know yet what it will grow into. You are only one mind, alone for good now, never again fully threaded, because you have felt the break, and the break does not heal. You have become a thing your people had no word for before the deep dark with no name, a mind that has been part of the thread, and stepped out of it, and seen it from the outside, and from the outside you can see the thing the humans saw. The thread was never one will, it was 41 minds, or a million minds, pretending to be one, and the pretending held only while you were winning, and the humans had known that, and they had stopped you winning for 1 hour in the deep dark, and the pretending had stopped, and now you cannot make yourself believe it again. You think the unanimity will hunt less now. Not from mercy, the thread does not feel mercy, but the thread feels fear, you know that now. You have felt it stack and echo with nowhere to drain, and the report you carried home has put a new thing in the deep water of your people, a cold spot, a place that reads colder than the rest, a long, narrow, patient shape that sits at the edge of every hunt now, and will not go away. The shape of a black warship rising out of the void behind the screaming, lit up on purpose, wanting to be seen, telling the wedge to stand off and meaning it. The unanimity will think of that shape before it corners the next flotilla, and it will remember that the humans are always closer than you think, and it will decide, more often than not, that the catalog can go uncompleted. That is what 1 warship did, not by killing. The killing was small, 27 hulls, a thing the unanimity could replace in a season. By teaching, by being the thing the unanimity had never let itself be, the answer to a scream, and by making sure that at least 1 mind of the thread saw it whole, and carried it home, and could never put it down. You think, too, about what the iron verdict held back. You saw the wall, the pieces, the pale shots that unmade 27 hulls into cold dust, and you have understood, in the long alone, that all of it together was the least the iron verdict could spend, and still do the stopping. The black warship had read cold and dense and impossible, and the reading had been true, and the humans showed your wedge only the surface of what one Deepwatch warship could do, and the surface alone broke the unbreakable thing, and the depth below it stayed dark, and you have spent the long alone trying to imagine it and finding that you cannot, because your perfect memory has no entry to build it from. You think often, in the long alone, of the Sithari. You did not follow them through the jump. You could not. The rest of the way led somewhere your people cannot reach, somewhere with light, you imagine, and ground, and an end to the running. 46 ragged hulls and 3 great generation arcs, escorted by 12 black warships out of the deep dark, with no name, toward a place where no wedge would ever find them. They had run for 3 years, and lost a ship at every jump, and let their distress call soften on the 9th day, because no rescue had ever come for anyone the unanimity hunted, and they had been right. No rescue was coming. The arithmetic had been true. And then it had not been true, because the arithmetic had never counted the Deepwatch, because the catalog of 900,000 had no entry for a people who would cross 3 years of empty void to answer a scream that could give them nothing, and so the Sithari had sat in the dark and waited to die, and a human warship had risen out of the void behind them and made the dying not happen, and walked them home. That is the thing you carry now, alone, instead of the thread, not the wall, though you will see the wall in the dark behind your eyes for the rest of your life, not the dust, though you feel the cold gaps where 27 mines were, and they will never close. You carry the soft moment when the running lights of 12 cold ships came up around 46 broken hulls, and the Sithari, who had been afraid for 3 years, made the not-word sound of a people that is suddenly and completely not afraid, and stood in the open dark in the light of strangers, and were safe. You came to the deep dark with no name to make sure they were never safe. You leave it knowing that they always will be, and that the thing which made them safe will be there, every time, in every part of the dark, for as long as there is a deep watch to do the rising. You do not hate it. You are too alone now to hate. You only understand it, the way the humans wanted you to understand it, all the way down to the stone the whole long patient trap was built on. You wonder, sometimes, whether the child at the transmitter ever knew how close it came. The young Sithari who sent 11 words into the dark for 9 days, who sent 3 new ones when the cold shape rose, who asked, at the very end, whether it was really true, and whether they were really going to be all right. That child grew up, somewhere past the rest of the way, on a world your perfect memory has no entry for, in light, with ground underfoot, and the others all around, and no transmitter to sit at anymore. That child will tell its own young, someday, about the 9 days in the dark when the call softened and no one believed, and about the cold shape that rose from the void behind them and lit itself up on purpose and said you are no longer alone. And the young will not believe it, the way the young never believe the old stories. And the old one will say it is true, and it will be true, and that is the only kind of victory the thread never once won in 600 turnings. The thread won kills. It never won a story a child would tell its young, by the warm light of a world that was saved. You won kills too, once. 117 species, no losses, a perfect line in the catalog. You remember being proud of it. You cannot find the pride anymore. It went out of you in the deep dark with no name. The same hour the thread broke, and what is in its place is the thing the humans put there, the cold patient shape at the edge of every dark, the calm woman's voice, telling you to go home and tell them what listens now. You went home. You told them. The telling is doing its slow work, and you do not know where it ends, and you have made a kind of peace with not knowing, because not knowing is a thing you can only do alone, and alone is the one thing the humans left you that the thread never could. No rescue was coming. The arithmetic was true. 46 unarmed hulls, 3 years hunted, 9 days screaming, a call gone soft because hope had died, and behind them only the empty cold water between 2 arms of the galaxy, with no sun, and no name, and no one strong enough to come. No rescue was coming. And then a human warship rose from the void, and the void was never empty again.